I'm Nick Bennett, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Aarti Shahani and Reverend Dr. Donna Schaper. We're also thrilled to have the poet Ed Foster here, who will close today's program with a reading. Finally, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that we are on the unceded territory of the Lenni Lenape, Canarsie, Shinnecock, and Munsee peoples. We acknowledge the many indigenous nations with ties to this land, and we recognize that the Lenape still call Mannahatta home. The Brooklyn Rail also stands in solidarity with the uprising unfolding across the country following the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McAtee, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, and Toyin Salau, and in response to generations of structural violence against Black communities. Black Lives Matter, and we will continue to support ongoing action in the struggle for racial justice. Before I introduce our host and guest today, we would like to begin with a brief moment of silence. Thank you. And now to introduce today's host and guest. Reverend Dr. Donna Schaper has been Senior Minister of Judson Memorial Church since January of 2006. She was formerly at Coral Gables Congregational Church in Miami, and before that at Yale University, and teaches leadership at the Hartford Seminary. She has written over 35 books, including her most recent, Never Enough Time, A Practical and Spiritual Guide. Aarti Shahani is an award-winning journalist and author. She spent her 20s organizing prisoners, and she then pivoted to business journalism and enjoyed a meteoric rise at NPR as Silicon Valley correspondent. Her first book, Here We Are, American Dreams, American Nightmares, in 2019, is a tragic comedy about growing up migrant in America. Aarti's reporting has received awards from the Society of Professional Journalists, a regional Edward R. Murrow Award, and an Investigative Reporters and Editors Award. Aarti lives in Oakland, California with her nephew, and she loves storytelling and justice. So for a conversation of storytelling and justice and beyond, I pass the mic over to you, Donna.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you again. It's great to be with the Brooklyn Rail again. We at Judson begin our 11 o'clock Sunday worship services exactly the way you begin your lunches, with an acknowledgement of unceded land and a remembrance of people who have been violently killed at the hands of so-called law and order. These are often sad things to acknowledge, but they are also, when acknowledged, liberating, and we get to see them. So I'm thrilled to be with you all again, and to be with a friend who I can only call old, even though she's really quite young. Aarti and I met 15 years ago, back in the days when we still thought that comprehensive immigration reform might be a possibility. Remember those days? And since then, we have been working together on one immigration, one deportation, one detention after another. And then she left me and went to California. She left Brooklyn too, so we can all mourn her departure from beloved Brooklyn. And it's just great. She preached a sermon on Sunday at Judson, which was great. And so in 1 week, I'm getting to be with her for 2 full hours. And we also burn up the telephone lines often about life, love, and loss. So Aarti, welcome to this moment. What did I miss saying about you, since it was also self-referential?
No, I think you covered it. I can say a few things about you. I first met Donna Schaper, Reverend Schaper. She's just Donna to me. When she had hopped into her leadership at Judson and was basically mapping New York City and the various issues relevant to communities of color, and seeking out, young leaders of color to understand what the issues around criminal justice and immigration enforcement were. She was relatively, I believe it's correct to say, new to it, but hungry to learn and incredibly open and non-egoistic. And so, Donna, I don't know that you know this, but I think it taught me something about how to enter into a new space and
Yeah.
seek out expertise, and that not actually conflicting with being a leader. So,
Right.
yeah, that was our meet cute.
Yeah, it's called a community entry system for anybody who wants to enter a new community. You just keep going in concentric circles until you are able to even think about leadership. It usually takes a year or two.
Love it.
So let's talk about your book, because the whole theme of this hour is going to be the way Aarti's life in Queens became a book. And it just is an American dream and an American nightmare. And she handles that parallel in the book. So tell us about the book, and then I'm going to take you back to your childhood.
Sure. So I wrote a book called Here We Are. And what I was doing, Donna, was I was basically turning my life and my family's journey into a case study, you could say. I wasn't actually trying to make any arguments about immigration reform. I did not write a political screed. I had the sense that my people are debated about so much. We are an issue more than we are a people. And so let me just push out my elbows and create the space to have an emotional journey. You know, who gets to have an emotional journey? It's often a matter of privilege, right? Like the person who has survived cancer is allowed to tell her story about that survival without having a blueprint for oncology payment reform. But the migrant is not allowed to speak. We're supposed to have an argument as opposed to a set of experiences. And I said, you know, to hell with that. Let me just share how it felt, what it looked like, the messiness of it, things I would never say in Congress in all those years I was fighting to keep my family together in this country. So my book is, you could say, in some ways, a migrant tell-all written from a woman who's garnered enough privilege that I'm actually allowed to tell all. In broad brushstrokes, what I wrote in Here We Are is my journey from undocumented kid in Queens, New York, to Silicon Valley, seat of power, getting to become the narrator to millions of Americans about an industry that's changing our life. I call that job at NPR, I lovingly refer to it as being America's favorite Indian IT lady. That's sort of, you know, how I first really got a huge megaphone. But, you know, as you know, that journey for me was nothing close to a straight shot. I grew up definitely poor, in a family that was working class. You know, there were a lot of stereotypes about what Indian immigrants look like. There's sort of model minorities, engineers and doctors. Well, here's some news. Plenty of us actually are working class, increasingly so in post-1970s migration. And, you know, I grew up in a community of color and majority minority already in Flushing, Queens. And my family, we overstayed visas and we got our papers through a process that is now derided as chain migration. And it's so funny how language works, right? Because the first time I heard chain migration, I was like, isn't that a good thing? I mean, it's like, it just means more people are added to links on your family chain and the chain is longer and stronger. But, you know, this is, Donna, something I'm excited to talk about with you is the kind of moment of moral bankruptcy we're in, where the laws make criminal things that are actually moral to do, like keep your family together. Anyway, we managed to get papers. And this is, Donna, where I think that God handed to me, or a higher power handed to me, a life experience that frankly, I was obligated to share. Because my family did not then, oh, we got our green cards and now it's just the American dream. It's the suburbs, it's the awesomeness, and we forget our roots. And yeah, we're model minorities, we're perfect. It was none of that. We thought we made it. I was a scholarship kid at a very fancy private school in Manhattan, the Brearley School for Girls on the Upper East Side. Cost a Tesla a year to attend. Some of you might already know that. And my father started his dream. He opened up a small business in the exact same block where he used to shovel snow as an undocumented immigrant. Things seemed to be going fine, but In fact, New York State came in one day and arrested my father, as well as his little brother, my uncle, and said that our family business, which was selling watches and calculators, was a front for the Cali drug cartel of Colombia. And therein, the plot twists and thickens. And my family basically had what you could call a very tragic or incredibly mundane experience in the criminal justice system. My dad and uncle were supposed to serve 8-month sentences for a first-time nonviolent offense that, according to the court, it was just going to go away after that. But the family ordeal actually spiraled not from an 8-month sentence to a 14-year legal battle that I ended up fighting. I became my family lawyer effectively as a teenager, because I had to both fight things that were going wrong in the criminal case and then a surprise deportation case that was added on as a second punishment. I mean, technically, in the eyes of the law, it's not called double jeopardy for various reasons, but in practice it is. So, and here we are. I basically, Donna, write about, it's funny. It's a story that a lot of people frankly relate to. I hear from readers, you make it here, but the American dream, it's not a straight shot. For some of us, it exists. For some, we can talk about this. My life is an example of how it's very possible when luck and certain things align. But, so many immigrants right now question, if not outright, question quietly, was it a mistake to come to America? Did my family make the right choice? What did it actually take to survive here? What are, in economics terms, the sunk costs? And so what I'm doing, and here we are, is I basically lay out, well, this is what it took for my family to make America home. And it wasn't standing on a line. It was a lot more than standing on a line, though we did that too. Yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah. And we were joking about the pronunciation of names before. So let's just go back to your childhood a little bit in Queens, where you were called Aarti Farty by children who had enough prowess in English to make a stupid joke. It's all amazing to me how mean children can be.
To each other. Yeah.
But kind of to what do you attribute? I mean, one way I've read your book, one way I hear the story is, look, the injustice, the way the system was rigged against my family was so bad, I had to turn into a hero on the spot. But who helped you get into Brearley? How did that happen?
No, I love that question, Donna, because I think that part of what I really wanted to dispel in the writing of my book and the opportunities to talk about it is this notion of self-made. Like, nobody is self-made, get real, And so my life experience, frankly, has been a stream of adults, a steady stream of adults who are not my blood, who saw this is a family, a good working class family who's struggling. This is a kid who's trying. And they went out of their way to help. So, how did I get into the Brearley School, which is, one of the most coveted schools to be in for the hyper elite in the city? I had a science teacher in public school who, it was so funny. She noticed I was really good in class, and she happened to have, her maiden name was my last name, Shahani. She took a liking to me. And so she put into my hand one day in 8th grade a brochure for a program that takes working class kids of color and on-ramps them with full scholarships into very, very, very elite institutions. And so, I had that experience, and that was my introduction to the world of wealth and power. It happened when I transitioned from public school into 9th grade, the Upper East Side. And, I write about this in the book. Growing up in Queens, I had never actually seen so many white people live before. Like, I'd seen them on TV. I grew up watching 13 hours of sitcoms a day, but I'd never actually seen them live. And I remember going into school that first day of class and just physically feeling wow, where am I? And then also for the first time in my life, feeling dumb, frankly. I didn't know people could be so powerful, that so many little girls my age in a room could, like, I heard terms I'd never heard before, like the term country house. Like I grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, apartment 401. So I didn't actually realize that there were people my age whose families had 2 homes. It blew me away, a house that is in the country. But part of getting to Brearley, it wasn't just the frankly fantastic education I had there. It was fantastic. It's where I learned to write. I'm happy to share that story too. But it was learning for the first time and at a very early age what power looks like.
So, and obviously you've had a long life already of thinking about what power looks like. Do you think that that power that people have when they have a country house, how do you describe it now? What does the little girl think and what does the woman think?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think for me as a child, it created new categories for me, right? Because, like, for example, when I was little, when someone asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? What I would hear, and it came mostly from TV, was like this notion of a doctor or a lawyer. So my childhood goal was to become a prosecutor one day. I grew up in a neighborhood with crime. And I knew that I wanted to do something like nerdy and smart and, empowering. But I only had a limited number of categories. I didn't grow up seeing what a bunch of professions were. I didn't grow up with the names for the things that people could do. And entering into Brearley, learning a term like country house, learning the term PhD. I had never heard PhD before.
Right.
It started to teach me the categories that exist where people occupy this thing called power. Now, getting to your point about how do I see it then versus now, I think back then, the fact that people had so much luxury, it startled me. It fascinated me. I also felt too self-conscious to talk about it because I didn't really want people asking me about my family in that way. As an adult, I'll be honest, like, I love it when my friends invite me to their country homes. This is part of my journey in life, is going from it being so exotic and strange to, after so many years of exposure, getting how it works and seeing how it works, both in my social life as well as, in my reporting in Silicon Valley. You see so much wealth. You understand that for some people, spending $1,000, $2,000 is a lunch, and so it gives you a sense that it actually, coming here and really stepping into what is one of the global seats of power and wealth, it's actually made me more, not less, upset about how working class people are treated. Because I feel that when you have wealth, you get to be understood and you get to speak and explain yourself a whole lot. And when you don't have wealth, you are constantly judged in ways that are sometimes quite unforgiving. Yeah.
Anything else about that teacher who put the brochure in your hand that you remember?
Well, I just remember she was like a delightful lady with very curly, short hair. There's actually an image of her that I remember when I saw pictures of Kamala Harris's mom, reminded me of that teacher for a hot second. And then there's another teacher, Donna, I'll tell you about. When I was at Brearley, it's actually a teacher I'm still very close to. We talk even during COVID. Her name is Ms. Leonard. And I say Ms. Leonard because prior to meeting her, I didn't know that a woman could be a Ms. I thought you were either a Miss or a Mrs. Right. And here I was in 9th grade, and Ms. Leonard told me that men just get to be Mr. and women have to identify whether they're possessed or not in terms of marital status. So she taught me that Ms. is the term she goes by. And I remember one day she actually pulled me aside after class. And this is back, Donna, we both call me Aarti now, but I used to be Aarti. That's like my Starbucks name. But I remember one day after class when I'm at Brearley, Ms. Leonard said, Aarti, please say it back when class is over. And I immediately wound up. And it's interesting. Whenever an authority figure tells me they need to talk with me, I immediately assume I've done something wrong. I'm going to be kicked out of something important and my life is going to be destroyed. I mean, I have such an apocalyptic wiring. It's wild. But Miss Leonard pulled me aside after class and she basically told me, she's like, Aarti, in class, you understand what's going on. This was history class. You know how to, for example, analyze the charts about rice production in Vietnam, throughout the 60s and how rice production plummeted because of whatever. You know how to do that. But on paper, you don't know how to communicate what you know. And she basically dropped this atomic bomb of a lesson on me. She's like, here's the thing about writing. You should write like you speak. And I looked at her, Donna, and I was in my head, I was like, are you effing crazy? That was sort of my reaction, because I thought writing on the page is where you try to sound as complicated as possible and use as many big words as possible. And this lady was like, no, just put on the page the way you sound in person. And it was like a freaking trust fall, which I also learned over there. But to learn to do that. And Miss Leonard, to me, she's this example of the kind of person I've gotten to meet consistently in my life. And that person is a leader in some kind of authority position who sees, oh, here's this girl or young woman who is kind of different here. She's kind of an outsider. She's trying to make it here and she needs some extra help. And she went out of her way to give me the extra help I needed so that I could turn, my B's into A's. And so, that's an important lesson for me, Donna, about this notion of self-made, is that behind every quote unquote self-made person who's left, you have, the chemistry teacher, you have Miss Leonard, you have the loving neighbors who are lifting her up.
Yeah, I read in the book this kind of doubleness about the horror of the systems that were against you and your family, and the benefits and blessings. And I think that's why it's a tragic comedy, I think. I mean, I had this guy in my congregation once in Riverhead, New York, who inherited the car dealership that he ran from his father and insisted he was a self-made man. And I would bring it up to him. I would say, Jonathan, I'm not trying to insult you, but you're not a self-made man. You started on third base. And he said, no, that's not true at all. I work really hard every day. So it's it's a deeply ingrained mythology. And what I love about stories like yours and like mine are that there's a hand up and not a hand out. That does happen. It's a proper use of power. It's a restorative, reparative, reparational power. I've got it. What am I doing with it? Give it away.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a kind of, it's wonderful to hear it acknowledged. And I wonder what happens. Well, I know what happens to the people who don't get the hand at the right moment. And I know you know too.
Yeah, and it's also interesting where the hand comes from. But I do want to say, just what you've just said, and you and I have both experienced this. You call it a hand up, not a hand out.
Right.
There's no shame that you work hard. You push hard, heavy lift,
right?
And there is luck involved. There's no shame.
Right.
It's actually just reality. And it's interesting to me how many people I know who've had to struggle to make it, as I have, who've had to struggle, who feel fear in that acknowledgement. And I actually think that acknowledgement is quite liberating.
It is.
When you can allow your pain and your gratitude to coexist, as opposed to choosing just one or the other. This is what worries me about Hallmark cards. But it's like, let them be together. It's totally okay. And that's, part of the thesis of my book, Donna. And this is actually a point I have for people who are raging around politics right now as well is it is absolutely correct to indict what is broken in this country. I mean, if we don't do it, we're not going to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more impactful and effective for our own soul as well as the body politic to rage and also know what we're grateful for. You know, like I can tell you, I am angry at what this country did to my father. They destroyed the life of a very good and hardworking man. I can also tell you, this is a country that has allowed me to evolve and to speak up and to exercise my voice as a woman in a way I would never have been able to do back home. You know, a woman with a mouth like this back home, this mouth would have been broken. And in America, it becomes the basis for my very good salary.
Right. Right.
You know, and that kind of joint, you know, rage and gratitude, I think that the more we can foster that duality, we will see and work our ways out of the messes we've created.
Mm-hmm. Let us give thanks for mouths. All right, I want to move you into the moment. You, Aarti Shahani, in the present. You've been on CNN a lot this week, talking about the election, talking about the virtuality of it, which is obviously something you know a lot about, technology and what it's doing to us. You also know, you're inside what it must be like for Kamala Harris in so many different ways. What's it like? You spoke briefly, but I want to know what it's like to have such a big mouth now.
I don't know, Donna. It's interesting how you say it because I feel I'm a speck of dust. I don't, you know, I'm grateful I'm allowed to speak and that there are platforms for me to speak, but I don't, you know, it's interesting. You mentioned the media appearances. I'm actually enjoying a lot of the conversations I'm having that are more small and intimate, where there's a community exchange, you know, the sort of the more grassroots stuff, because I feel like, and I say this as being part of the newsroom ecosystem, you know, in newsrooms, a lot of what's projected on the biggest platforms available is kind of fast talking judgment. You know, that's a lot of the vibe, the tone, the culture of it. And I think a lot of what we need to work our ways into an intellectually and spiritually more elevated place is slower and more intimate conversations. I mean, that's what I love about writing and reading books is you were forced to slow down. And we have to see clearly. And so, you know, I don't know that my mouth is actually that big or that amplified, but I can tell you that where I find the most meaning is in conversations like these.
Well, I knew you were going to go for the mutuality because you developed mutuality with your family. You know, you did take responsibility. Maybe you were early adulted. I mean, forgive the psycho crap, but it's true for a lot of immigrant children that you have to become an adult much too soon, and it's hard. But it also comes with these gifts of knowing how to nurture, knowing how to accept a gift and give a gift. That's really important. And also you've earned the right not to be in that. You know, Aarti is a brilliant strategist. There were a couple of years in the early immigrant rights movement, in my experience of it, when she knew the answer to everything and it was driving me crazy. And I would have to think for 2 days to come up with an argument about why we frame the deportation as double jeopardy, because I wanted to frame it as forgiveness, you know, that it's an assault on the religious concept of forgiveness and therefore an assault on religion. And she would say, oh God, don't go there. Nobody gets it. Okay. But you learn to speak all the different languages. And I appreciate what you're saying about the fragility of people who can't be in pain and grateful at the same time, right? So it's a real gift. So now well, I know I do have one main question for you. What do you really think about technology?
I mean, it's always been there. I don't think that I like technology. I mean, look at we're together here, and I feel close to you because of it. I have, as I've obviously reported on, I have deep concerns about, the ability of individuals and companies to ride off of publicly created tools and privatize them and monetize them and call the shots on the way that we understand, basically control information in the world. I mean, I think that there's so much to be done around redistributing the power, that certain technology companies have amassed. But I don't think that, and this is actually part of what I think about with the issue of migration, is that the march of it's not just the march of capital, but the march of technology is making the world converge. The fact of geography is actually becoming less relevant, not more relevant in our lives.
Right.
And so I find it interesting that you see throughout the world political movements that have seized on nativism, xenophobia, racism for, sort of quick political gains. You see that at the same time that you see Netflix streaming global hits, right? And so I think that what's going to happen is that technology will keep moving us in a direction where at some point politics is going to have to give in to what human relationships are becoming. Now, does it happen in 2 years? Does it happen in 12? I don't know. But I think what's interesting is, when you and I first met, Donna, and for several years thereafter, there was in the US a political debate around what's called comprehensive immigration reform.
Right.
And in a nutshell, comprehensive immigration reform is a trade-off between legalization and enforcement. So, hey, we'll give you 3 or 5 million green cards in exchange for a bigger border wall and more ICE agents. And that kind of trade-off doesn't actually respond to the fundamental facts of how human relationships are changing, or even what US economic needs are. And so it's interesting because I think that politics really does lag behind culture. And we're seeing the rise now of political leaders that are able to be bold enough to translate our values into different ways. And I would give as an example of that Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang, his campaign, it's not just his campaign, but the campaign that others have started, and he's amplified around universal basic income. Prior to COVID, mainstream newsrooms, including mine, I think, were rather dismissive of UBI and this notion of universal basic income and people just getting paychecks. Then COVID happens, what do we have?
Right.
So I think that what I'm excited to see, and what, as I speak, what I hope to really help to accelerate as a writer, I mean, I really do belong in the lane of storytelling and culture. That's my lane.
Yes.
I would love for, when I told you that my book is a case study, here we are as a case study.
Right.
And there are case studies in novels and literature. Like I recently read a book called Lucky Boy, which is a great novel. There's literature out there, fiction and nonfiction, that captures the truth of where migration fits into the US body far more clearly than political leaders have. And so I have a little fantasy that the House Judiciary reconvenes at some point next year, and we give them a reading list and say, hey guys, please read this literature, and then they'll craft something that makes sense.
Well, the whole idea that politics is in lag is very clear through COVID. I mean, we can't even figure out, we have to go state by state to mandate masks, for example. And yet technology is stomping its way across the world. Netflix is obviously a great example. But if we move to the future, I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Is it going to be that these crises create internationally intelligent systems of governance, or are they going to scare people so much that will remain in the quote dark ages?
Oh, I don't think that I'm like that seasoned a futurist.
No. What do you think is going to happen to you as this all comes down? As my Harvard student said to me the other day, pandemic, and I know you're a Harvard graduate, so don't take this personally, but she gave me a new word, and I'm going to try to say it right, and it's pandemicities. What's going to happen with the pandemicities, the plural pandemics, some of which are, manageable if we had government, but we don't have government.
Well, I don't know. I mean, so part of how I pay attention to what's happening in trends is, frankly, I read a lot of business news.
Yeah.
I look at, are companies still buying and investing? I think that the pandemic is going to accelerate certain kinds of innovation that we know has been long overdue. For example, higher education is clearly broken. One way that higher education may transform through the pandemic is much better online learning and much more intentional use of physical time together in the real world. Another way I hope the pandemic transforms higher education is that, Donna, the entire world is on a global gap year. Okay. You might be working, you might not be working, but the fact is every human who can think is rethinking the fundamentals of their life. Yeah. And so I think about, well, where does schooling fit into helping you live a purposeful life? Unfortunately, for the most part, it doesn't. A lot of people hunger for direction from school and can't find it there. I learned a fascinating fact from my book. Authors told me before, Aarti, you let your book out into the world, and there's some reactions you're expecting, and then you get some reactions you never would have expected. So here's one reaction I never expected. Donna, when I wrote Here We Are, I have never cried so much in my entire life. The weeping that I had, how painful these memories were. It's also a eulogy for my father who passed, so there was just so much weeping and pain. So I think of this book as grief. Mm-hmm. It goes out in the world. I started hearing from kids, teenagers, teens, early 20s. Right. And what I'm hearing from them is, this is such an empowering coming of age story. And I was like, really? Yeah. And they're like, yeah, you were like, you're a teenager and all the adults were screwing things up and the court case was going badly. And you just decided, I'm going to write to the judge. I'm going to fire and hire a lawyer. I'm going to go to Congress. You just decided to do it all. And a few people have told me this, young people, it's made them rethink their own agency, what they can do, how much they can do. And I love that, because I actually think that we have a way of really infantilizing people. My experience is that when you're 19, and I've encountered many people besides myself who have this, as a late teenager, you're having transformative leadership experiences that are going to shape your entire life. What I'm doing with my life, I'm a storyteller who cares about justice. That started at 19. It started with fighting a legal case, and it's continued in many forms since then. I've interviewed no shortage of leaders who had transformative experiences at an early age. And so part of what I believe is happening, and I hope is accelerated through this horrible pandemic, is we take more seriously the leadership of young people and empower them more intentionally through curriculum, through mentoring, through relationships, so that they can move faster than we did. Yeah. We've got real problems to take care of.
Well, like Extinction Rebellion, I think that people do listen to, quote, the young people, the otherized young people. Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to just take a few more minutes with you and then open to questions, because I think you're covering so much territory. I know people are going to want to talk with you. I know you want to not be a futurist, but I thought coming up with the global gap year is a great idea. Coming up with following the youth is a great idea. The notion that technology and culture are lagging behind politics is very interesting. The reverse. It's a very interesting point of view. Where do you see, I never ask authors about their next book. But where do you see, beyond conversations, your line of thinking and your narrative, the trajectory of your narrative, your story going?
You don't want to ask me about my next book?
Okay. All right. It's always embarrassing to do that because I know authors, I'm an author and I hate it. I hate that question. Okay. All right. You invited me. What about your next book?
Well, actually, let me answer the first question you laid out. So I think that what I enjoy doing, the creative challenge I enjoy, is taking something that is intractable, an issue, topics laden with judgment, with set minds, with assumptions, and just diving into stories that really challenge those assumptions. You know, like I enjoy, like I'm a contrarian, you know that I'm like a contrarian, you know, like I love disagreeing with people and I'm uncomfortable when I agree with people.
And by the way, that has worked very well for you to not what my father-in-law would call, you know, the happy HS. Just you say no, that it's this. It's good.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that like my writing life seeks to keep doing that, you know, in different formats, you know, in broadcast, on the page, and other formats. So, you know, that's what matters to me. I will tell you, Donna, that I believe that my next book, I'll write more than another book. I mean, I love writing books. I didn't know that I was an author. I didn't frankly know I was a writer until I wrote a book. But I pushed out Here We Are in 6 months. I basically locked myself up in empty rooms in New Hampshire and a Buddhist retreat center in Massachusetts. And I just pushed out that manuscript. I mean, like, man, it was labor. And I came out of it realizing I love the craft. I love thinking about the math of a story, the number of scenes that go into an arc, you know, what kinds of scenes you need, putting them together. And I believe that if not my very next, certainly among the next books I will write is a fiction about an alpha female searching for love and unable to find it. And I hope it induces a lot of laughter. I hope that,
I'm laughing.
Well, yeah. So no, because I think that there are a lot of challenges in you know, in heterosexual relationships. There are a lot of challenges between men and women understanding each other. And I think that I have a story arc that will help those of us who are those women to see ourselves more clearly, and the men who really want to love us to see us more clearly.
That's fun. That's fun. All right. So I'm not going to ask you about marriage and children then, because I'll find out in the book. But obviously it's a very favorite subject of mine, both in a very life-giving way and also a real pain in the you-know-what. So talk about institutions lagging behind. I would say that the institution of marriage and family and child raising has, I don't know, hasn't gone very far at all. But that's another subject. Okay, Nick, I'm gonna, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yes, I got a couple direct questions that were sent to me. Firstly, thank you both. This has been a really interesting conversation, and I really, really enjoy hearing about your background, Aarti, and these really important topics that we need to be talking about. One question that I got from someone was, you know, we're thinking of immigrants and working class people, of course, but we are in this age of COVID. And, you know, from your perspective, Aarti, I'm curious if you have a particular viewpoint or perspective of what you've seen of how that is. I mean, we already know it's disproportionately affecting certain communities, but if there's, you kind of talked about, you know, how it is affecting like the tech and business sector, but I'm curious with the mixture of all of these things, how do you see COVID at the moment and where we're going? Also knowing that we're on different coasts too, and you know, there's lots of difference.
See COVID with respect to, I just want to understand with respect to what?
I think specifically in respect to immigrant communities and working class communities, having that firsthand experience.
Yeah, I mean, I hope this is answering the question. I think that, I mean, there's the actual toll COVID is taking on people's lives, which is disproportionately, we know, working class communities, communities of color. I mean, COVID, I think, like when I talk to people who are, for example, more expert in public health, they make the point that this pandemic, it exposes and exacerbates the inequalities that were there, in terms of care, in terms of testing, in terms of everything. On the labor side, I think what's happened with COVID is, you might recall this, when COVID first became acknowledged in the US, and I think the turning point really was in March when the Bay Area announced sheltering in place, school was being canceled. There was a real acknowledgement of this thing is for real. Um, one of the tropes that was out there was, oh, this is like the Chinese flu, and this is going to like set off a wave of xenophobia and closed borders and all this kind of assumptions about how this is going to affect our relationship with the migrants and the notion of immigration. And what's since happened is sort of two things of note. One is that there is, I believe, now an acknowledgement of essential workers who are working class people that frankly we lacked prior to this pandemic. So I've noticed, for example, in the tech community in Silicon Valley, where many leaders, many people are inclined to be exceptionalist, to think we're the important skilled labor and then the menial labor is less important. That's really been flipped on its head. With remote work, software engineers are now acutely aware that their jobs are not as essential and it can be outsourced anywhere in the world. But the nanny and the housekeeper and the cleaner are suddenly essential. So I think that there's been a real flipping of that understanding that you wouldn't have expected at the beginning of the pandemic. And then secondly, US citizens are not allowed to travel into other countries. I mean, the value of my passport plummeted during COVID. And I don't enjoy that as a citizen. I would like to be able to, we often assume we can go anywhere in the world, but the pandemic, how we as a country have mishandled it, I think we've been served. So hopefully what it means is lessons learned and more humility, which we could certainly use. And obviously in my response to you, you can tell that I'm an optimist. Like I keep pointing to what might be good about this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Before I go to the next question, Donna, did you have anything to add? You're kind of nodding your head.
I was very interested in the value of the passports and the flip question. I mean, just Americans love to do this. I call it street art. So everywhere you go, it's thank you, essential workers, or when there's a terrible crisis, we pile up stuffed animals and flowers like at 9/11, or where a bike is gone off the street. I mean, there's this ritual behavior that I think precedes thought behavior. And forgive me for taking a minute, but I do think that there is a flip, that working people who do service stuff, and I would love to see it translate into some legislation, like money for caregivers. That would be a huge. I just don't want it to be a ritual on the streets of empty gratitude. So I appreciate that thought very much.
There are some interesting silver linings coming out of the pandemic, and yeah, that's absolutely one that's important.
Or this whole school debacle, when schools go on 15 different schedules and you have more than one child, what do you do for daycare, especially when there is no daycare? So I'm pulling a shift 2 hours a day for my 1-year-old granddaughter so her two mothers can work. My husband does the other two, and they double time these jobs. It drives me crazy, and they cannot find daycare, right?
Well, as we sort of think about even bigger and complicated things, I'm going to pass the mic over to Deanna, our friend, for the heavy hitting question. So Deanna, just one moment. You should be able to activate your mic now.
Okay, thanks, Nick, and thanks once again for the Rail doing these wonderful events. opening up these discussions. And Aarti, I really deeply respect your work. I'm so excited that I could be here to listen to learn more about your background and all of your incredible sorts of thoughts. So my question being, and I'm glad that you're an optimist, because I'm hoping that you can offer some kind of hope for me here. My question is, given the assumption of most governments that capitalism is the only viable economic system, how will the corporate oligarchs like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, etc., that are served by the governments be forced to relinquish even some of their power and wealth?
Yeah, so actually, I'm going to pull up a name and a title I want you to check out. So I think that, capitalism and regulation have long coexisted, and they're often at critical junctures out of whack. There's an economist who I find very compelling. Her name is Mariana Mazzucato. She's an Italian lady, and very hip also. You can just really love watching videos of her too. And she, I think, writes a very compelling set of books, the most recent being, or one of the most recent being The Value of Everything, where she basically just spells out what's gotten out of whack is you have companies that have basically benefited tremendously from public sector investment. Like, we invested in the creation of DARPANET, which became the basis for the software economy. So why then does the taxpayer not get more return on investment? It's poor negotiation from the government, for the public sector arbiters, who we're supposed to look out for our interests. So I just feel like there's so much that could be done to reclaim value that was left on the table. I can't help but be optimistic, because given all that didn't happen, it wouldn't be hard to see improvement. Like, there's just a lot of improvement to be had.
Yeah, and we can't get much lower, right?
To hitting low, right? I mean, I'm saying it from a lot of personal experience too. Like, I've seen some stuff. And, when you hit what feels like rock bottom, the benefit is, well, what's the direction to go? And I would say the other part of it, though, and I'm someone who, likely similarly to you, loves to read and understand things. I am compelled by a point I'm hearing more and more, which is that knowing things is not the same as doing things. So I say this even as an author who, it's in my interest that you read a lot and that you read my stuff and whatever. I think it's important to stay informed, and it's important to ask yourself, what is the community I am part of that puts the energy into realizing actual change in this world? How do I engage? Where am I engaging? In addition to reading and being outraged on the many feeds that will feed my outrage, what am I doing in the real world, and with what team, with what people, so that we're actually creating transformation? And so I think that that's as important, frankly, as being connected to the theories and visions of change.
Right. Yeah, no, I appreciate the perspective. I'm also glad that you reminded me of Mariana Mazzucato, who I actually learned about through an economist, Marxist economist, Richard Wolff, who I believe is associated somehow with Judson.
Very, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of his, and so it's really it's just very challenging, I think, for if one is thinking that we have to preserve capitalism at any cost, that it is so misaligned with humanity, really, and social justice, that the forces, I do see that things are changing in people's minds, especially with this pandemic situation, but it's I know it's a heavy lift. So I'm glad that a lot of people are thinking about it now. So thanks again for this.
Thank you, Deanna, as always, for your very thoughtful questions. Next, I'm going to pass the mic to the Rail's own managing editor, Charlie Schultz. Charlie, mic is in your hands.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Aarti, for a really inspiring and uplifting conversation. Aarti, as you've been speaking, I've been noticing the artwork you've got on the wall behind you. Very iconic. And when you mentioned the lowest moment, that image spoke to me. I also saw underneath it about it being your New York accent, which also made me think about Donna talking about the importance of street art. And I basically just wanted to know about those two images behind you, who the artist is, what the images meant to you, what happened maybe in that moment.
Let me pull out, it's funny. I love that you're asking this, and this is going to tell you something about me. This art doesn't actually belong to me. It belongs to a friend of mine who basically ended up moving to Singapore and lending me some art, or frankly, storing it in my room while being away. I want to pull out the name of the artist, and I know that I'll tell you why I love the images while I pull out the name. So the first one, you might not be able to see it clearly. I'm not sure how clearly you can see it, but basically it's a picture of the towers, but there's a carnation, there's a flower in a spot where the tower was hit, where one of them was hit. And the reason I like that image is actually, and I write about this in my story as well, my brother worked at the World Trade Center, and I know on the morning of 9/11, when I discovered what had happened, I instantly worried that he was dead. And what happened for my family, as well as a lot of other brown people after 9/11, is we became criminalized, targeted, whatnot. And I remember as it was happening, and I was 21, around 21 at that time, I remember being really confused that we could be turned into the villain for a thing we were grieving ourselves. And so this art, this depiction of a flower growing from the wound, is, to me, again, it's very easy to lose hope. I mean, we've been using this word quite a bit. It's very easy to lose hope. And if you're leading in this world, if you want to be a good person, a good citizen, a good, and I use that term normatively, you actually can't lose hope. Like that's failure, right? Like you can't let yourself. And so I feel like this image that reminds me beauty can grow even from pain. I've actually needed to learn that over the years, because I was so angry at how my people were turned into the villain and the real consequences. I mean, I spent my 20s in New York City working with more than 1,000 people who were rounded up and deported from our city and our country. A lot of my social life was people like that. More recently, it's really fascinating. I remember one of the first sleepovers I had after the 9/11 attacks was a young Pakistani woman. Her husband was taken in a raid, and her little kids and she were in an apartment alone, and she was terrified of being alone. And she basically asked me and my partner I was organizing with to sleep over in her home. Long story short, that family got deported. So the kids who were born here were effectively deported as well. A few months ago, years now have passed, more than a decade's passed. A few months ago, I get this message on Facebook, and it's the kids of Razia, who were raised in Pakistan because their parents were deported, have now made their way back to the US. They grew up, they were born here, they're legally allowed to be here, and they're now trying to find their life in this country. And, and they're not the only ones who've returned. I've met other deportees' children who've returned, who've reached out to me to let me know that they're back and sort of see what we can do for them, if anything. Like, what that reminds me of, it's like life is long and there is a cycle to it, and that things can flower from what is death, destruction, pain. The other image, the one below it, this is my New York accent written in it's graffiti, it's tagging. That's probably a bit of my, California is achingly polite. NorCal, I love it here. I love the nature here. I live here because I love nature, it turns out. I find it jarring how nice people communicate here. And I miss the bluntness and the edginess of New York City. And I'm nostalgic for people who will push you in that subway car, but pick you up if you fall over. And, like that's how we love there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aarti.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that little bit of background. So our next question and some final comments come from our own Fong Bui, a publisher and artistic director of The Rail. Fong, I'm passing the mic over to you.
Thank you, Aarti. Thank you so much, Donna, for this fun conversation. And being an immigrant, I certainly can relate. And all the early formation of my own family somehow came to Bucks County, landed in the place where there's nothing but deer and white people. And the first movie that we were told to watch on television just happened to be The Deliverance. So you can imagine.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to leave the home for at least a month long. But because of yesterday, we have a wonderful second of our radical poetry reading, curated by our friend Andre Corescu, which, I don't know, 6 other poets. Anne Wortman was in it, John Godfrey, Sharon Masmer, Eleanor Nowen, Alicia Ostreicher, who else? I think Vincent Cass also. And it just happened to be Apollinaire's birthday. And since Ed, our amazing poet's friend's about to read later, who's been sort of compared with Apollinaire, because he does so much. Ed, I admire Ed works very much. He's an editor, he's a writer, he's a critic, he's a teacher, all of it. And on that note, since you are now working your novel, the question is super simple, Aarti. You have a writer that you admire, that you console with, you have an affinity with?
Yeah, so many. I would just say that one who is currently living with us, who I think is just such a guide for me, is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who I think her voice it's just so complex and powerful. And so I definitely very much take her as inspiration. For an understanding of America and American identity, because I write so much in sort of grappling with this context, James Baldwin, who I think is a sage for so many of us. So those are the 2 who I look to for a lot of guidance.
Okay, great. Any Indian author at all? The classical?
Yeah, plenty of Indian authors. I mean, Arundhati Roy is beautiful with her prose. I absolutely love reading her. It's actually funny. This is not considered on the sort of popular American literature, but even when I was writing my book, I got really into what's called the Shiva trilogies. This is the best-selling book in the history of Indian publishing. Written by a man named Amrit Tripathi. And it's basically taking the character of Lord Shiva and kind of turning him into this sort of hero in a very digestible, page-turning way. And so, what I love about so many of the South Asian authors is not just a delightful prose. And I would actually add, a book that I recently finished called Lucky Boy by Shanti Sakaran, which is a fantastic read. It's not just a delightful prose, but it's this capturing of a certain set of values that really speak to how I grew up in terms of what family loyalty and duty look like, and also the sort of duality of truth, very much so. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, back to you, Nikki.
Yeah. And I'll actually just say, I'm so sorry to do this. I actually am supposed to hop into another event. And so I had a stopping about 5 minutes ago. So I will need to, I'm so sorry I have to hop off.
Not at all. Thank you, Aarti, for being with us today and sharing your story. I'm going to post a link for everyone to, if you'd like to pre-order
Thanks
Aarti's
so much.
book.
I'm sorry about this. Okay.
Not at all. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Love you, Donna. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, as is tradition with the Rails New Social Environment Conversations, we end with a poetry reading. Today, we are very, very thrilled to have Ed Foster. A quick bio, and then I'll pass the mic over to Ed. Ed Foster has published 17 books of poetry, plus assorted volumes in history, biography, and criticism. He lives near the Vermont border in Massachusetts, where he tends to his fish, weeds his garden on a steep hill that was an island in a prehistoric lake. Ed, I am passing the mic over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You can? Okay, good. Okay, so the parallel boy. You list to the left, vote for the first time in years, please your mother, and regarding your shape in the mirror, release gardenias into the air. Elegant, sweet, permanent joy. How do you know what you wish? Where is the parallel boy, the little white tiger in knickers and spats, who came and delivered his lesson before you entered the world? You are sweet, said the tiger. Envelop my grace with your arms, bear me away, take me up to the roof and examine my teeth in the sun. In the booth, the people I speak of will vote and continue to vote, but I am the carrion boy, and up on the roof are the angels, and I, and all of them do as I say. The fractal lie. My sleeping dragons, figurines, and walls, all around my fears are breaking up. Things outside this room are things I used to think I'd need. I've taught myself to be alone. I now define myself with thought and know that objects really aren't the things I need. I reinvent myself each time I look around, as if I were a clock or changed with every shift in tone. Ruskin had to say that color, form were not enough, and he was wrong. What we need most now are mirrors or a lake, just enough to hold us for one moment still. As Heraclitus said, all is change. Was he ever there? The imagined one, the one above the roof, my patriarch of skies. We see him pointing out from posters. We count the chains that twist about his neck. Who captured him? Who pushed aside the girl yet still brought lethargy? Our breath is made of his. We satiate his need. We pleasure him. My friend asleep. Here he lies sleeping, step quiet, step soft. Where is his voice? It melts like snow. Thus you should fear such that whatever he wrote on the page is not what we hear, nor what we heard. Then his music was flat, something other than heard. The snow is melting, washing away. As for now, the station is empty, no waiting, no rooms in which to wait. Where is he going? Sleeping under the snow. For I remember, Dave, your flesh encased in jeans and your dark sequin look, moonlight spots across your frame as we walked through the woods. I recall your boyish hair and how your boots tramped down the silvered plants. I would have kissed had you coat reached back, but laughing was enough, had to be. So you and I were 17, or maybe more, and now another classmate dead. This time him, next time it could be me or you. Where is the flesh that I would so caress? I feel it, though last year when we crossed paths, I hardly knew that grizzled chin was yours. The you from way back then is with me now. You're gone, but in the solid air, I hold the early you. Hermes. So much and nothing more that you might wish, a sullen wisdom when you kiss. Oh, don't I wish, no time for talk. maple leaves and darkened skies, their plenitude of unrelenting disposition. How much there is to ask of whom. Looking out my window, nothing but reflections can be seen. Basic truth. No touch, and yet not wanting touch. When wind's enough, heat can rise, warming hands. Then wanting is enough, a simple gesture holding air in desperation. No, you mistake to say that's such. Then winter's dreary day convinces you that silence is the simple message teaching can deny. And finally, Saturn. The water in this wide canal is dark. It hides the silk. I think I lie within a branch reflected there and watch your fingers hold me down. Your hand becomes a part of my depleted sky. Although I can't possess, I will concede the hand that holds me here is wholly mine, something you will never see nor own. Neither absence nor wit, but the plentiful blue of the sun. The one I wanted now will not go home. This is his dance, surrounded by the pine trees in the frost. Their resin burns, and I myself desire what I thought I'd never see. As if beneath the sheets, his hand were turning round the sun. Ecstatic, cold, it burns. He is the one I watch, and so am seen. My brothers, all uneven words are his, the rest belong to you. He finds himself within the abstract line, for there he cannot feel. The hand that reaches toward his shirt can feel his touch. Feeling, as he says, is not to choose. Knowing nothing, nothing's really felt, I wrongly say. The sky is yours, and in your sky, the sun again begins to burn. You are alone. The others do not call. You build their harvest. And in my mind, though only in my mind, I see your fingers reach and move along the air. Oh, Father, what color will I see within your shirt tonight? Thank you.
Snaps, applause. Wow, thank you, Ed,
Thank you.
so much. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
I want to thank, of course, Aarti, Donna. Thank you for being here today so much. There was an intimacy today that, Aarti was saying she finds really validating. So thank you for being here today. It was kind of like family only, or I guess I should say comrades only.
Yes.
So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Ed, for reading for us. And as we all may know, we do this every weekday at 1 p.m. Eastern time.
You're amazing to do it every day.
We're
Oh my
still
God.
going. We're still going.
Amazing.
Tomorrow we will be joined, or please join us tomorrow for a conversation with artist Kent Monkman, who has a large installation up at the Met, which is opening late this week and into next week, who will be in conversation with Royal contributor and art historian Amber Jamila Musser. So we hope to see you then, and keep an eye out for our schedule next week. And I believe you all can activate your mics now and say farewell.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Ed. Too nice, too wonderful.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you. Safe.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Ed.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for your
Ed.
poems.
The beautiful reading. Thank you, Donna. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Really enjoyed those poems, Ed. Thank you for those.
Ed, I
thank you, Ed.
Google interviews that you did, poetry and poetic in the millennium, that you edited, Ed, with our friend Clark Coolidge, Alice Notley, Anne Woodman, Ron Paget. I have that book. Can't wait for you to sign it one day. I have a lot of your books. I have the beginning.
Answerable to None has always been one of my favorites, Ed.
Yep. Thank you.
Very flattered. Thank you.
We'll have to visit the prehistoric lake.
I'd love to.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Yeah, have a great day, Ed. Bye, Donna.
Yeah, thank you.